Johnny the Walrus is a young boy. He's just a normal boy, and he likes to play pretend. And one day he comes into the kitchen, and he's pretending to be a walrus. He pretends to be all kinds of different things. And his mother is kind of silly and confused, like a lot of parents are these days. And she thinks that Johnny the Walrus, or that her son Johnny is that this game of pretend must be something real, must be something she has to take seriously. That this is what he's really identifying as. And so a lot of the book, sort of hilarity ensues as she tries her hardest to raise her son as a walrus, as she thinks that he's identifying, and culminates in her finally bringing her son to go live at the zoo, because she realizes she can't give her son the walrus lifestyle that she thinks he really needs at home. Until finally, at the very end, she realizes that no, just because your child is pretending to be something, just because he quote unquote is identifying a certain way, doesn't mean he actually is that way. And we need to understand a little bit about child psychology. And so I think that's what I was trying to get across in the book.
Right. And your book comes at a time when parents are speaking out at school board meetings, fighting back for control over their children's education. So, what kind of message do you want to send to parents who will read Johnny the Walrus with their kids?
I think I want to send a message of, first and foremost, basic sanity. Understanding what it means to be a child, because that seems to have gotten lost in the shuffle. We've completely lost sight of the mentality of a child, and that children live in a world where there's not firm distinctions between fantasy and reality, where they quite literally don't understand the difference between what is real and what's not real, between fantasy and reality. And I think in our society, there are people who are exploiting that confusion to try to tell a story about childhood that is completely false. And they're doing it because they want to impose, they have a certain ideology, gender ideology they want to impose on our children. And they're exploiting the kind of innocence of childhood to do it.
And the mom in your book, she is pressured into following her child's wild imagination. So, why do so many parents cave to the woke mob, especially when it comes to their children's health?
Well, I think you said it in your question. It's because there's a mob, and it can be really difficult sometimes when you're facing a mob of people. It almost doesn't matter what they're trying to pressure you into doing. When you look out in society, and it seems like everybody that you encounter is telling you one thing. There have been a lot of studies that group sort of the mob mentality. There have been many psychological studies done on this over the decades, and it's consistently shown that when people feel like they're in an environment where everyone is going in a certain direction, no matter how crazy it may have seemed to them initially, they're just sort of compelled to go along with the flow. And so I think that's how most of this happens. I think parents are convinced oftentimes to go against their better instincts, and then after a while, when you're lost in this fog, in this mob mentality, the fog that the mob mentality creates, you lose sight of those instincts, and you just kind of go along with it. And I also think there are also parents who, this is not the case all the time, but there are certainly parents who they want to be accepted by society, and they want to sort of put their kids up as trophies. And say, oh, look how enlightened I am. I have a trans child. I have a gender non-conforming child. And so there are parents who make a decision, even apart from the mob, to themselves impose these kinds of identities on their kids.
And it's just children playing pretend. I mean, why are teenagers so obsessed with microlabels when it comes to gender and sexuality? Is it just internet subculture feeding on the youth's need to feel special, to feel understood? Is there something much more evil at play?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot at play now. You kind of have to separate between young kids and teenagers, because it's almost two different phenomena. With very young children, it's exactly what I said, that they just have active imaginations. This is why I always say to people, if you hear a very young boy, let's say a 4-year-old boy who says, I'm a girl. Now these days, parents are told, again, when you hear your child say that, take it very seriously, and that's their identity, and that's their lifestyle, and that's it. But a really good follow-up question for a young child when they say that is well, what is a girl? What do you mean when you say that? And it kind of boggles my mind that this follow-up question is so often not asked. And then when you pry a little bit deeper, you'll find that what the child is really saying is like that he finds appealing certain things that his little child brain associates with girlhood. So he might really be saying something like, "Hey, my sister has a dollhouse and it looks cool, and I want to play with it." That's what he really means when he says, "I'm a girl," because he doesn't even know what a girl is. I mean, he doesn't really know what a boy is either. So that's what's happening in early childhood. I think when you get into adolescence, and there's an interesting flip here, because while it seems that the gender identity stuff is being foisted on among young children, it seems that it's primarily foisted on young boys. That seems to be the special target. Get into adolescent years, it's primarily girls that are falling victim to it. And I think the reason for that is that girls and boys, as they get into adolescence and puberty, they start to feel not quite at home in their bodies. And the changes for girls especially are even more pronounced. And so I think they have even more profoundly that feeling of not feeling home in their bodies, at home in their bodies. It's a really normal feeling for kids to feel, especially going through puberty. You have kind of a normal identity crisis, trying to find your place in the world. And now we have the culture that comes along with this pre-made framework and saying, "Oh, well, you have all those kinds of feelings. Here's what that means." Oh, you feel not at home in your body. It means that that's not really your body. You were supposed to have a male body. And so they have this pre-made framework that kind of, in their mind, makes sense of everything. And that's why they, I think, glom onto it.
And we're even seeing pro trans doctors endorsing this. So, how can a sector of the medical community support this kind of transition at such a young age?
I mean, how can they do it? They do it because, again, they're exploiting. This is exploitation on the part of the doctors. Why would they exploit it? Well, for one thing, I mean, you can always follow the money. There's a lot of money to be made for these doctors. The prescription companies that are giving out pills like Lupron, which is a quote unquote puberty blocker, but actually it's chemical castration of children. I mean, they use that same drug to literally castrate sex offenders. And so we know the pharmaceutical companies have a monetary incentive. The doctors have a monetary incentive. And I think that explains a lot of it for the doctors anyway. And they're just allowed to get away with it for ideological reasons.
And what is the best way for parents to fight back against this mob that's telling them, telling their children, telling teachers and their community to believe this certain way when they know wholly that it's wrong?
We're seeing parents fight back now, I think, especially in the school system. So continuing that trend, I think, is one thing we ought to be doing. I think for a long time, parents had sort of ceded the school system, surrendered it, and in many ways surrendered their children to the school system, not really thinking through the fact that when you send your kid to school, you're sending them into, if they're going to public school anyway, you're sending them to a government building for 7-8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year for 12 or 13 years, all through their formative years. And you are allowing the state to not just educate your child, but to decide in many ways what kind of person your child is going to be. And I think many parents kind of went along with that passively until recently, when there's been a reckoning, an awakening of sorts, and they're holding the school system accountable. So that's one thing. And then on a deeper level too, you have to hold your kids close to you, and try to, we have this idea that we're not supposed to insulate our kids from the world, because then you're putting them in a bubble. But there's quite a lot in the world that your child, especially at a young age, it is not psychologically ready to encounter and to confront. And so you do have to insulate them. I mean, something as simple as don't give your 9-year-old a smartphone with internet access, where they're going to encounter all kinds of ideas and images and everything every single day, bombarding their minds, and they don't have the capability to sort through and sift through any of that. So, protect your kids, I guess, is one way to sum it up.
And I believe you homeschool your children. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So they're not subjected to the public school system, but still, what kind of future and world are you hoping to build as your kids are growing up in this insane society?
Ideally, I'd like to see, a society that's grounded in truth and sanity, and which, when it comes to kids anyway, values a child's innocence and endeavors to protect that innocence. I mean, that's what a society should do. Um, Societies, in many ways, should be structured around that. And I think you can tell a lot about a culture based on how how it treats children. And that's what tells you everything you need to know about our cultures. How, based on how we mistreat them. So that's the kind of society I would like to see. I don't expect that any magical switch is going to be flipped anytime soon to make it so that we suddenly live in a society like that. And so then the backup plan is to, as I said, insulate your kids as much as possible, protect them, and give them the intellectual and moral training that they need when they do finally end up in the wild, crazy world to hopefully be able to endure it.
And it just seems like the left and just today's culture is trying to hypersexualize children before they even hit puberty. How has it come to this? Is it just politics? Is there more to it?
Yeah, I mean it's politics, it's ideology. You could trace a lot of this back. That's another important thing to understand where a lot of these ideas come from. The left's gender ideology, their sexual ideologies. A lot of this goes back to guys like John Money, Alfred Kinsey. In the mid 20th century, these quacks and so-called psychiatrists and sex researchers who had a very clear idea, a very clear plan to sexualize children. They saw human beings as inherently sexual literally from birth, and that's the kind of world that they wanted to build, and so a lot of it, I think goes back to then. It is important to trace, I think, these things to their roots.
Okay. Well, your book is not just a children's book. It should be read by adults everywhere so they understand the essence of the fight. So thank you so much, Matt, for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, thank you, appreciate it.